All right, you have a bona fide philosophy cartoon on your screen for your viewing pleasure, even dealing specifically with free will and determinism. All right, so what do the libertarians have in their bag of tricks that they think is good evidence for believing that they're right and determinists are wrong about free will and moral responsibility? One of the things they have in their bag of tricks are arguments. In other words, they think that they have reasons that justify rejecting determinism or reasons for accepting the existence of free will. One of those arguments might look like this. Premise number one, in other words, reason number one for believing what I do. If the theory of determinism is true, then all of my thoughts, including all of my choices, are caused by the physical events that are governed by the laws of nature. Premise number two, it is not the case that all of my thoughts, including all of my choices, are caused by physical events that are governed by the laws of nature. Therefore, says a libertarian, the theory of determinism is not true. Now, if you've taken logic with me before, I know exactly the response you had when you saw this argument up on the screen. You said, oh my gosh, it's a modus tollens. Boss. Yes, it's a modus tollens. What that means is it's a particular argument form. This argument has a particular structure. And the structure is such that the way that the ideas are arranged in the premises guarantees that that conclusion will be true if we accept the premises are true. So if we believe premise number one is true, and if we believe premise number two is true, we cannot reject the conclusion. We'd be doing something irrational if we did that. The conclusion has to be true if the premises are true. And if you want to, you could pause the screen right now and kind of play with this a little bit and see if you can figure out a way to prove me wrong on that. Is there a way the conclusion could be false even when the premises are true? The answer is no. But you can try it out, try and figure out a way on your own. All right, so what the libertarian is going to do is they're now going to have to supply us with evidence for believing that both of these premises are true. And I want to offer you one way they might go about doing this that involves analogy. Okay? So an analogy is when you say something is like something else. Okay? So when you say something like, hey, performing brain surgery is sort of like performing heart surgery. These things are very similar because with both you have a patient's life right in your hands. And you might think to yourself, is it true that brain surgery and heart surgery are similar in their level of responsibility that they place on the doctor performing those surgeries? And you might think like, yeah, it is. So even if I've never performed heart surgery, but I've performed brain surgery, I kind of understand the level of responsibility that the other surgeon experiences when they're performing their surgeries, because we both do something very similar, even though it's not the same. So I can draw a conclusion about what must be true about this person's experience based on an analogous experience. I'll show you one of my very favorite analogies that was offered by Malcolm X in the 1960s in response to the phenomenon of white people getting increasingly involved in the Black Civil Rights Movement. And this caused some concern for Malcolm X. And he thought that the more white people got involved in the Black Civil Rights Movement, the more sort of compromised or weak the Civil Rights Movement was going to become. But he didn't just address it kind of head on like I just did. He also addressed it by an analogy. And here's the analogy. And what I mean by it is the increasing involvement of whites in the Black Civil Rights Movement. It's just like when you've got some coffee that's too black, which means it's too strong. What do? You integrate it with cream, you make it weak. But if you pour too much cream in it, you won't even know you ever had coffee. It used to be hot, it becomes cool. It used to be strong, it becomes weak. It used to wake you up, now it puts you to sleep. It's a perfect analogy, by the way, in terms of its artistic quality. It's beautiful, right? And you can see how this would be very moving to people listening to this, because we can understand how coffee and cream operate together when they're integrated. We can understand how each has an impact on the other when these things are integrated. And what Malcolm X is hoping is maybe this will help people understand the danger of white people getting involved in particularly in leadership roles in the Black Civil Rights Movement. And what we would do is we'd ask ourselves, is this a fair analogy? Is this a reliable analogy? Is it acceptable? Is it appropriate for me to draw a conclusion about the dynamics of a civil rights movement based on something similar that happens with coffee and cream? And if not, we might say, as beautiful as the analogy is, and it is, it's a faulty analogy. In other words, for analogies to work, anytime you make an argument by analogy, you're always in risky territory because you're arguing about what must be true for one thing based on what's true for something else. You're not actually arguing about the thing that's at issue. But you can do that as long as the two things that are being analogized share very fundamental similarities. And what I mean by fundamental is they have to have properties that are directly relevant to the question at hand that are similar. And they can't have any fundamental dissimilarities. In other words, there can't be something about them that's really important to the question at hand that's very different. So I gave you the heart surgery, brain surgery example. We'd say like, no, these are similar enough to be able to draw conclusions about what this must be like for different surgeons experiencing these types of surgeries. Now, the question we'd have to ask for the Malcolm X's analogy is what happens in coffee and cream similar enough to what happens in civil rights movement to draw a conclusion about how we should react to something happening in the civil rights movement? And if not, we might have a faulty analogy. Now, libertarians are going to point at premise number 2. And they're going to say, I think it's not the case that all of my thoughts, including all of my choices, are caused by physical events that are governed by the laws of nature, because I don't think that my thoughts are similar enough to things like falling trees and other physical events to say that what must be true for trees or cars or rocks is also true for thoughts and choices. In other words, I don't accept, says the libertarian, that the conclusion that you're drawing about my experiences of thinking and choosing, I don't accept that those things are similar enough as events to physical events like trees falling and so forth, that you can draw the conclusion about what must be the case for my thoughts based on what is the case for physical events that take place in the world kind of out there. And that's going to cause the libertarian to just kind of say, so I don't think I can accept that what must be true of trees falling is also true of my thoughts occurring, because I don't think these things share fundamental similarities, and I think they share a lot of fundamental dissimilarities.